Hi everyone, and welcome to the 18th International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival, Docudays UA. This is a DocuClass section. My name is Yulia. I'm a programmer at Docudays UA. And today we're going to have a very special event, an unusual one is for the DocuClass section. Since we're going to talk about not professional filmmaking and not professional approaches to the filmmaking. Instead, the topic of today's conversation is an amateur cinema. So this DocuClass will be about something not professional, but still really interesting and I would say significant, since during this strange and hard year of the worldwide pandemic and sequences of lockdowns, an amateur video and amateur film became one of the most popular and accessible way for us to express our support to each other, to get used to the new conditions of everyday life, to cope with the tragical challenges. So they became one of the most popular, accessible, and essential way, I would say, of solidarity. So this year's Docudays UA, so to say, pays homage to an amateur cinema, and our program includes several selections of amateur films. For example, a retrospective of Anatoly Surma. He is an enthusiastic animator who is living in a small town of Teofipol in Khmelnytska Oblast, and he's creating his cartoons just for his YouTube channel on his personal computer. And as you can see, his aesthetics provided a blueprint for a visual concept of our festival. And the second one, selection of amateur films, is called Film Troubadours, Scotland and Ukraine. And this is an online interactive program, which includes two selections of short amateur documentaries. One is from Scotland and the second one is from Ukraine. And both of them are focusing on, so to say, essential generalizations about the very amateur cinema and amateur filmmaking. So on the one hand, there are some typical and significant points and elements and techniques for the Scottish cinema amateurism. And on the other hand, there's, so to say, an evolution of an amateur author in Ukraine. And for each of those films, we created interactive subtitles, which are research notes that deepen the understanding of the film, deepen the context for each film. This program was created with the support of the British Council in Ukraine, and with a partnership with the Center for the Urban History of Central and East Central Europe. This program you can watch for free on our website, docuspace.org. We are releasing new films from this program every day, and each of them remains available for 48 hours, so please do not miss. But still there are many questions on how to watch amateur films. What is the value of amateur cinema? What is the reason and how to collect, to research, to actualize amateur films? And all of these questions we are going to discuss today with our guests who are actually working on the program of amateur films, Film Troubadours, Scotland, Ukraine. And I'm very pleased to welcome Heather Norris Nicholson. She is a honorary researcher at Huddersfield University and Manchester Metropolitan University. And Heather created research notes, which you can read in international interactive subtitles to the following films: The Coming of the Camerons, Escape to Freedom, and Build Me Straight. Hi, Heather.
Hi, thank you.
Also, we have with us Graham Spear. Graham is the lecturer in academic support at the London College of Fashion at the London University of the Arts. And Graham created research notes to the tweet and give us a goal. Hi, Graham.
Hi.
And I'm also very pleased to welcome here Alexander Mahanets. He's a head of the Urban Media Archive of the Center for Urban History in Lviv. And Alexander is a curator and an author of research notes to all of the films in Ukrainian selections of the program Film Troubadours. Hi, Alexander.
Hi, hi.
First of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for this incredible work and this exciting program. And thank you very much for joining us. Before we'll start talking about the nature of amateur cinema and amateur filmmaking, let me please start with some personal question. Amateur cinema is quite fragile field, I would say. So as far as I know, it's not enough institutionalized. So this is just kind of a principle for an amateur filmmaking, and also this is the reason why it's not quite obvious field for making research or for turning it into profession. So how did you come to amateur cinema, and why did you start working with it or researching it? Heather, maybe we can start with you. I know that you published a lot of research texts and books, and one of them is British Women Amateur Filmmakers, National Memories and Global Identities, was created together with Anna Maria Matrescu-Myers. He's also a curator of the Scottish selection of the program Film Troubadours. How did you start your researching? How did you start working with amateur films?
I thought you'd start with me. My memories go back really quite a long way. And even as an undergraduate, I remember studying films. They were ethnographic films, they were documentary films, although I was not a film studies person. But what that film did alert me to was the way in which filmmakers constructed meanings about others, and it immediately made me begin to question how visual cultural memories are made and shared. Now let's fast forward to 1994. One of my colleagues, a colleague working in history at the College of York and Ripon St John, now York St John University, and received through the post from an archivist in the Netherlands amateur film on VHS to watch. Here's the box right here. Okay, I looked it up and said, would you like to comment on it? I watched and I was fascinated. The world it took me into, and I would say since 1994 I've continued working. My approaches have changed. First of all, it was very much amateur film as evidence, and from that my interests have grown across many areas of amateur film, thinking about the relationship between the people in front and behind the camera, gender, lone workers, members of cine clubs, award winners, the film's journey into archives and through archives, and the changing meanings that we give to amateur film as it shifts from a private context into more public viewing. And I suppose to all of it, I've brought an interest in changing media technologies and a sort of interest in the visual forensics that perhaps dates right back to my own archaeology background. I don't know. So, and I introduced film into my own teaching from the mid-1990s, and first at undergraduate level, and then continued teaching right through into 2014 on bringing amateur film into postgraduate courses. And since then, I've worked outside formal education, just trying to widen the outreach and the audiences for amateur cinema, and through work in schools, work with communities, art galleries, film festivals and so on.
Well, thank you. Graham, and as I know, as far as I know, that your PhD thesis is also dedicated to an amateur cinema, and it was called Amateur Video Technology, Behavior and Practices, 1965-2015. Why did you decide to make this research? What was really interesting for you?
So I was doing a film studies degree at Glasgow, and Ian Craven and Ian Good were two of the senior lecturers on the course, and Ian Craven's obviously written extensively about amateur cinema. So I ended up doing an honours undergraduate module that he ran on amateur cinema, and I for my dissertation I looked at a Scottish amateur filmmaker, William Dobson, who did a series of 4 amateur films that were based around his kind of countryside cottage in West Linton, which is just outside of Edinburgh. So there's a film in the Scottish Screen Archive called Weekend Quartet. And I actually ended up doing a sort of oral history interview with his son, but he was deceased at this point. And it was, I mean, it was just, it was incredibly interesting. And I kind of explored whether these types of films could be loosely fitted into a sort of post-Second World War framework of kind of middlebrow culture and aesthetics. And I think that was kind of, I just realized how fruitful doing the research was, and that kind of led to a master's, and then that kind of opened up the PhD. So I don't know, there wasn't so much intent. It kind of just followed through from the undergraduate dissertation.
Thank you. Alexander, and you've been working at the Urban Media Archive for several years. Why did you, how did you start working, and how did you start with it?
Thank you, Julia. Like researching and amateur film practices and amateur films is my recent interest while I'm working at the Center for Urban History and the Urban Media Archive. Once my colleague Bogdan Shumalovich brought the idea to organize the Home Movie Day in Lviv, and at the moment when I came to the Center for Urban History, we already had several collections of amateur films shot on 8mm and 16mm cameras. So like for the last 5 years, we are organizing Home Movie Days in Lviv. And for the first time, when we made the open call to digitize for free for the people their reels, and only four people brought their films, and it was not that much at the moment. And I thought that it is not that widespread and not that common phenomenon, film amateurs, but after few years, we collected very huge collections of digital collection of these amateur films, and it became more interesting. My interests also rooted in the interest of vernacular photography and photographic practices, as we have also a big photographic collection in our archives. So since you are working with it, organizing this Home Movie Day, you started noticing like the variety of these films and starting understanding it better. So this brought me to this starting my small research on amateur films, and also continuing to collecting them at the Urban Media Archive.
Okay, and I'd like just to briefly remind to our viewers that you can leave your questions in the comments under this stream on our Facebook page, in YouTube, or right on our website docuspace.org, right under the player in the chat box. And let's just jump to the very nature of an amateur films and an amateur filmmaking, and maybe to most exciting from the from the audience point of view question: how to watch amateur films, how to watch amateur cinema, because pretty often amateur films remain, so to say, hermetic, and it requires some, requires some efforts from you to get involved in it. Don't you think so? And maybe, Graham, what do you think? Maybe is it the question actually how to watch an amateur film?
Do you know what I wrote down? I think you need a bit of patience first. you need a very good seat. Secondly, and then thirdly, you need a coffee. I think this is a difficult one, because I think they avoid an obvious textual analysis. So even within film studies, there was a sort of an aura around them, because they evaded any kind of clear interpretation. But I mentioned this a little bit in some of my contextual comments. So I think in a way that they can be an exercise in attention. And I mean, you'll probably laugh, but I like to watch them in the morning, because because it's, my concentration's at its best. But I always say to students too, it's very different to watching a professional film, and there's maybe a little bit more of labor in it, but I think in a way that also brings a certain reward as well. And I don't know if the others maybe agree with that. But
Heather, what would you advise a viewer who are going to start an amateur film first, and not really familiar with this kind of cinema?
Yeah, I really like Graham's comments. Thanks, Julia. I think have lots of time for rewinding and watching again. Some amateur films are short and simple. Some are quite sophisticated. So there's a great variety there. Don't give up on the first one. Give it time. Don't leap to conclusions. It's partly where you're coming from. And what standards you're trying to set it against. If you're setting it against a still image, I think it's rather a different aesthetic and a different starting point to thinking about it in relation to a piece of film from the British film canon or anybody else's film, history. I think peeling away the layers of meaning, listening with the sound down and the sound up, makes an interesting experiment. As with all films, you begin to see how the filmmaker may have put it together. If it's an early example of cine film with added sound that might or might not work, as in one of my films. Watching for different aspects, watching one film by one filmmaker, or then looking at different films by the same filmmaker to see how connections occur. You begin to see whether that filmmaker is always working in the same style, whether he or she has little techniques, little tricks that keep on coming up. And then looking at another filmmaker's work, you find very different stories and ideas and issues begin to emerge. That's my immersive way of approaching it.
Great. Alexander, and you've already mentioned that you have organized home movie days in Lviv several times. Could you please tell us about more about the format? How did you show the films?
Oh yes, like home movie days is one very special and one of our favorite events during the year at the Center for Urban History, because it's quite emotional, and that's how we do it. We are before the home movie day, which we have and all around the world in the October. So we are announcing open call, so people bringing us their reels and their home movies, their films. We are digitizing them, making the selection, and then organizing the screening and inviting those people with their families, as well as other audience. And we, as those films are mostly mute, so we silent films. So we are giving the microphone to the owners of these reels or the authors of these films, and they are commenting it live. So, and it's very interesting interaction with the audience, with the reactions, and when someone commenting about the film, because it's all it has a lot of some small secrets and some stories, some family stories, memories, and so on. So all the time, this very emotional event, very positive event. So that's what we tried to reconstruct a little bit in this program by recording the interviews for some silent films in the program. And also maybe to give some hints for the audience how to watch the films. Of course, I agree with the colleagues that the patience is the number one, but also for watching such films at the festival, first of all, and what is mostly important as for me, you have to be open for something new, because very often those films are surprising you. Sometimes they are very boring, sometimes they are very dynamic and dramatic, and sometimes it's just like some long shorts which are not that interesting. So it's not that kind of film that you have some special mood and the algorithm recommends you what to watch on the platform. You have to be open, first of all, to watch and to have this a bit of patience, and then you will enjoy it.
Most, almost all of you mentioned this, that we need to have a patience to watch mature films. But it's really funny because, Film Troubadours program covers a period from 40s up to 80s, and this is the period when you need to work with 8 and 60 millimeter tapes. But today we have an abundance of video blocks, a multiplicity of the digital technologies and opportunities for amateur filmmaking, and it seems that sometimes that it's a little bit too much of this videos. But the question for me, does this digitalization affect somehow an amateur filmmaking, and does it push a development of an amateur filmmaking approaches in amateur filmmaking, or does it this extreme accessibility and multiplicity devalue an amateur filmmaking? What actually, the border between an amateur filmmaking and something not really, something that we cannot call like a film? Alexander, would you, as a curator and as a head of Urban Media Archive, would you like to collect current amateur videos and films? And if so, what the criteria could be here?
So of course it's very hard and complex question, because we have also the question how to archive these recent archives of videos and footage. So of course it's very interesting, and it's very important to think about this now, because now we are all believe in the digital technology, that is something that will last forever, but the digital technology not that sustainable. I think sometimes as film as well as other moving image formats. So it's very important to talk about it, but it's first of all, it needs the special approach in archiving, and then the theoretical approach, how to archive, how to select these materials, because we know that a lot of our a lot of images and as well as videos and files and data that is produced by us now belongs to the platforms as well. So they are stored at the servers, and not often we often even don't know if we have the rights for these materials and who have the rights, as we are posting our videos, and so on. So that's also a question for I think that's a huge, big institution that should be supported by government, because it requires a lot of funds for archiving and digitizing such kind of materials. So we are, as a small institution, we are just trying to fill a little bit this gap and also actualize these topics. But even digital archiving for us, because we are not storing the original reels and films, it's also very I don't know, it's also the process that requires a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm. And Graham, how do you think, what actually defines an amateur film and filmmaker and filmmaking, I would say? What actually define, what actually the difference between, you know, an amateur cinema and a video for a video blog?
I think there's a few different tangents to the question. I think the kind of amateur movie making that I've looked at within cine clubs, kind of historically, I think I think it's a historically specific project. So I think like people making vlogs or videos now, I don't think, I mean, they might be doing it non-professionally, but I don't think it could be called amateur cinema in the same way. But I'm conscious though that the cine clubs are just one aspect of a much kind of larger series of practices. So I can only really speak for the cine clubs, but for me, yeah, I think the cine clubs are something that's very historically distinct. So yeah, I think amateurism has it within this context is quite, yeah, it's quite localized within these kind of semi-formal structures. But I mean, that's not to say that there isn't still a kind of contemporary amateurism.
Mm-hmm. And we actually have a question from one of our audience, Anastasia Sarapina. She's also asks, where is the line between edited videos, just like, you know, just like in a video for a video blog, and movies? And I would like maybe to extend this question a little bit and to maybe to ask whether there are some criteria for you. What actually for you is this, you know, a movie today, an amateur movie today? Whether you can consider some video from, you know, from video blog as the cinema or like in a film? Do you believe that we can still, you know, to have this border between amateur films and just like unedited videos?
Okay.
Okay, Heather, what do you think? What is the place and role of an amateur filmmaking today? Who is an amateur filmmaker, actually?
Okay, well, in a sense, I suppose more and more of us are amateur media practitioners, because we record and we share and we disseminate, you know, images through devices and constantly. So many more people are able to be producers and consumers, and we can circulate it and we can watch it in all sorts of different ways. But I think, just as in the past, there was a continuum of practice from the very, very simple and straightforward, taking of home movies and to show your babies learning to walk or whatever. It's right through to the really serious filmmakers, the sophisticated filmmakers who learned about editing and made references to the style and visual aesthetics of other practitioners within the professional domain as well. I think that happens now as well. I mean, what I think amateur media practitioners have now is they have greater access, they have greater availability. They also, their material is much more ephemeral. I know Alexander says there's lots that is, you know, is there to archive, but also it's much more disposable, isn't it? You know, it will be interesting to know whether in 15 years' time, there will be lots of, you know, images now, or whether they will have just been deleted, put into the bin. And I remember asking students about their photographs and how many of them, they last less than 30 minutes. They're taken just for the moment, posted and disposed of. So but I think there's some also really interesting differences about amateur media practices now, and that do contrast with the past and its usage. And we still use it for first-person testimony, but the context within which people are, bearing witness are very, very different to the rather elite and only gradually slowly broadening social usage of earlier technologies. So today we see amateur media constantly in our international news, in our national news. It is coming from front lines. It is coming from the oppressed, from the suppressed, from people who can't get their voice out, their story out, for reasons of oppression, suppression, whatever. And it still shows the power of the media, the message of contemporary amateur media makers is has a more critical edge than I think it did have in the past, because of wider usage, wider availability, and it becomes a tool, a very, very powerful tool for first-person testimony in areas where people are denied the opportunity to speak out, get their message heard. So it has a very challenging role today.
Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking that if one takes a look at the program Film Troubadours, it becomes obvious that there is a big difference between the approaches in amateur filmmaking in Scotland and in Ukraine. And the Scottish documentaries in the selection are mostly created in the base of, some amateur studio. At the same time, Ukrainian selection includes only few films created on the base of some amateur studio. Do you think, well, actually, do you think that there is some particular reason for this difference? I mean, let's talk a little bit about the historical maybe background here. Do you think, is it correct to talk about particular national amateur cinematographies? I mean, does amateur cinema in particular countries establish some particular traditions? What do you think? Heather, I'd like, yeah.
So just say that question again. It's about.
Yeah, what do you think? Is it correct to talk about some particular national cinema, amateur cinematographies? Does some amateur cinema in particular countries establish some national traditions?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting question. I think it would be right to claim that the different social and economic, political and historical contexts of different nations very much shape the way in which amateur cinema has developed within different countries. And I think it affected the production systems. And I think particularly within Eastern Europe, within Soviet times, there were state-sponsored studio systems to encourage amateurs to tell a particular story for political reasons. But that never happened in more democratic systems in the West. Amateurs were not paid centrally, were not subsidized. It was absolutely free. I think that's why there's really such an important value to amateur cinema. In some national contexts, it does not take a national perspective, an official point of view. It's an informal, it's a private, it's a personal, it's an unofficial. It's therefore not the conveyor of a particular message, and it's offering in its own particular way a counter narrative, even before it becomes particularly political. it's a sideways take on the dominant narrative of what's going on. So, and I would also say that yes, different countries have a different history, and as different technologies become available, different access to cameras, whether it's bought new cameras or second-hand cameras, access to sound, access to color film, all of those things began to arrive in different countries at different times for different reasons, and became accessible to different groups of people who began in turn to use them in different ways. So the story of amateur film in Italy and in Tunisia and in India and in China and Japan may have aspects in common, but they will also have very, very specific differences as well.
Okay, Graham, maybe you have something to add to this. Do you also believe that amateur cinema can establish some national traditions, or is this kind of films too atomized, so to say, for such consolidation?
No, I think it can, but I think there also needs to be an acknowledgement that there's like kind of strong regional variance too. So I mean, if you look at the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers, the IAC, as well as having a kind of Scottish and an English manifestation, they also have smaller sub-regional groups. So I think it's something that works on scale, but I was going to say that more generally, that maybe one of the differences too is like the extent of the kind of club infrastructure. So, I mean, for example, I know that in 1930, there were already 12 clubs in Scotland that were in existence. And apparently London had 27 active cine clubs by 1930. So I think, you know, if you have the kind of community infrastructure there, then that will inevitably just lead to, you know, a kind of macro national presence.
Alexander, and as for the Ukrainian selection, can you please tell us a little bit about this, you know, the history of the development of mature filmmaking movement in Ukraine, and whether there were some, you know, mature studios, or did it develop like just mostly the, you know, private practices?
Yeah, so like regarding the difference between the two programs at the festival as well as the local context, first of all, I want to mention that there's also this difference is also the specific of our collections, which is collected by the open call, and it's represent mostly the individual amateur film practices. And as for Soviet context, probably individual amateur films is kind of side effect of these organized group film amateur clubs and so on, which we are organized by the trade unions, or organized within some factories or some other enterprises. So that's the difference between this context, because in the Soviet Union from the 50s, this network of film clubs were organized, and also we have such examples. For instance, Film Derevo, which was found in the village in the central Ukraine. It comes from the studio which belonged to the farm. So they were harvesting the beetroots, and they had their own film studio symbol. And this author of this film, Victor Kizema, was very productive and active film amateur in this village. So and this film is representing this kind of organized group film amateur movement. But at the same moment, we have the individual film amateurs who were filming their families, their vacations, but also they were like filming the completed films, as the film of Orez Bachmaha, Мої вихідні, or my weekend.
My weekend,
yeah. He was also applying his films for the film festivals here but he was rather the individual film amateur and didn't belong to any film clubs and so on. But also, of course, there is some specific national or state specific, because amateur filmmaking is very tightly dependent of the industry and technology. So that's why it's the very specific phenomenon at the moment, and it can vary not only in some countries but also in different times. So we have the totally different story in different usage of amateur films in interwar period, or for instance in diaspora, where they using their films to promote their own culture and so on.
And let's back a little bit to your personal approaches to filmmaking and to amateur films and amateur cinema. How do you hold your researching and working with such kind of films, and what are the most important for you in this process? Heather, let's maybe start with you. What is the starting point for you?
It can vary. It could be a single film. It could be a single filmmaker. It could be a single image that is, or a single moment that can provide a fascinating starting point for exploring a theme, a topic, or how one filmmaker or a group of filmmakers might respond to their surroundings and start telling stories, using their visual media at that particular time. Sometimes amateur filmmaking is so impromptu and spontaneous, and it's the unexpected. And one unexpected detail that's not planned is just over in a blink, and yet that can have significance now. It could have be an eyewitness sense of being there at that moment and capturing the immediacy of an event, a person, an occurrence, an important occasion, and yet the way the camera captures that, it may be offering a side view through history, complete counter story comes across, a bystander's approach to something that we know through different ways. So that might be one way. It might be that how the film was made, why it was made, some of the motives. Was it made for charity? Was it made for personal reasons, for public reasons, for fundraising, to draw attention to a particular issue, like the Escape to Freedom film that I've written some notes for in the program. It might be something to do with the filmmaker. It might be that we've got a particular interest in issues of gender and identity and people's position in relation to the establishment, and we want to see how their access to the camera at that particular time enabled them to put out a message, self-expression, a message about something else. How it tells the story, the aesthetics, that might be important as well, and of course the content. Yeah, might be really, really important. What it tells us about the relationship between the filmmaker and who's portrayed in front of the camera. So those are some of my starting points.
Bremen, what do you find the most exciting and most difficult in researching amateur films?
I mean, primarily, I'll look for contextual information first. So, because say I'm looking at Cine Club titles, you can usually begin to trace them within the journals that were written in the time period. So, I'm kind of looking for reviews of films within amateur journals. What have other amateurs said about these movies? And then you're kind of, I suppose, you're looking at the filmmakers. Have they made other films? You can then look, at the Cine Club that they operated within. And then there's also the secondary frameworks offered by other researchers, like say Heather, for example. So I think you can look at other contextual primary information, but then there's obviously secondary kind of theory or other historical work. But then I think as well you might be dealing with a truly orphan film, that even have a title. And I think in that instance, there perhaps needs to be more of an imaginative or a creative leap in what you can do or want to do with that film. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I'd start looking at them anyway.
Thank you, Alice. And you've mentioned already that you make some selection before you receive some film in your collection. Yeah. So could you please tell about what is your criteria for a film which you choose for working with?
So as we are receiving the films for our archives, and so like the first criterion for us for now is that we are working mostly with the films. So it's like 8mm, Super 8, and 16mm films. That's the practical questions, because we don't have the possibility to digitize that much some other formats. So, but every time before to see what is on the film, you have to digitize it. So we are digitizing and viewing all the materials, and then you are able to watch this. So, and from time to time, we receiving the films with some kind of how to say, like the produced cartoons or some small films on 8mm film. So it's not filmed by this author or by these people who are bringing us the archives. So we are not tending not to digitize such materials, because we don't have the rights to use these materials as well. That's the another context, because there is mass-produced films on these formats, and people very often they don't understand what is on the reels, so they are bringing us everything. Yeah, so, and mostly we are working with these film formats like 8mm, Super 8, and 16mm films. And we are not working with the materials which comes from VHS cassettes, like the video formats. Not that often, because people have so much of these tapes and these video cassettes, and it requires much more resources to digitize it, to store these materials, and so on. And also, like the films are like for one cassette, it could take the 3 hours of materials. It's harder to work with it. So when we are digitizing the VHS archives, it's mostly some specific topics by specific authors, like documentaries from the late 80s to early 90s and so on, but rather not digitizing like everything of it.
What do you find the most difficult in this process of working with these films?
Oh, wow. It's even hard to. Probably the most difficult is like the technical process, because it's requires the specific stuff and specific knowledge, specific time. But we have the person who are helping us with this, like all the technical questions, and digitizing it, and understands the technology, and also is like the passionate of amateur filmmaking and so on. So it's easy to work with such people, but still there is some materials are in bad conditions. Sometimes you have like the destroyed perforations of or films, so you have very often you have to little bit restore these materials. Often very difficult is to ask and please people not to throw out their archives and films, because very often when the people got the digitized copy. They think that they don't need anymore their film, and they are just starting like to saying that take it or we will throw it away. So it's better to take it than it will become in the trash bin.
And we have just 10 minutes left. And to finish our conversation, I'd like to ask you the question that I hope will help us to summarize somehow our discussion. How would you express why is it interesting and important to watch and to actualize an amateur cinema, and what can amateur films give to a viewer? Maybe we can start with Graham. What do you think, Graham?
I think it give the viewer a lot of things. I think it can take people outside of leisure or spectator paradigms, from contemporary mainstream film. And I also think, it's not just historical too. I think you can envision non-professional cinema as a kind of generative tool. So, currently I get students to think about the materiality of fashion through looking at footage. And then you can also look at kind of therapeutic potential. So Yorkshire Film Archive had the memory bank, where they positioned footage to assist in kind of dementia cases and research. So I think, that there's so many avenues for its usage. And I think we also touched upon this earlier a little bit too, but I think it can also kind of take us out of this algorithmic logic of contemporary media, where everything is relational. And I quite like the abstraction of amateur film. And I think,
Thank you. Heather, maybe you would like to add something?
I just wonder whether it offers us a way of thinking about earlier periods and the relationship between the people at earlier times and the visual technologies available to them at the time, because the history of amateur filmmaking and amateur cinema is all about changing technologies. Some people changed, some people didn't change their technologies, but at the same time the cinema was changing as well, so some of the discussions about whether to adopt sound, for example, have echoes, and the relationship between storytelling with sound and without sound is discussed in the literature. I think so there are those things, points about style and aesthetic, and the relationship between the professional cinema industry and amateur, which are really interesting. In a way, amateur opens another space within which we can negotiate and try and understand people's changing relationship to visual practice through the 20th century.
Alexander, and I guess it's like the most hot question for you about the actual how to actualize and why is it interesting to actualize an amateur cinema. What do you think? Why is it interesting and why is it important, and what can an amateur cinema give to us?
So first of all, as for festival viewers, I think it gives like new experience and new visual experience. But of course, at the same moment, it requires this patience that we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. And I'm sure it's not that easy while you have such intense festival and everything is very intense. But I think also it's very interesting to watch amateur films with the groups or in the cinema even. So it's very nice experience. If to talk about and to answer your questions more general, it has of course the personal meaning to the people. So, and it's very important to actualize it, and because people even for now they very often they can't identify these formats and these films, even if they have them at home. And especially for our context, we are living now in this moment when the authors of these films are still alive. So it's very important to record and to capture this moment and to use it, because they are sources to identify these materials. So, and also this has very important, like the general and social meaning, because it's important to preserve it, because all these amateur films and all these amateur films practice opens us a lot of interesting topics about our history, about media practices, about understanding the technology, as well as understanding us today, while we also filming, taking photos and so on with our devices. So that's why.
And we have also the question of our viewer, also Anastasia Sarapina. She's asking, don't you think that amateur cinema is less popular not because of amateur shooting and low budgets, but because of poor popularization and unavailability of amateur cinema for audience viewers? Where actually, I'd like to make sure, addition to this question, where to watch an amateur films today? Maybe we can start with Heather.
Okay, I think that's really important. I think sometimes access makes it very difficult to see films, where initiatives, where programs have digitized and made material available online. It's good, but sometimes constraints of geography and finance and budget make it really hard to go and visit materials. So the collecting policy within a national context is very important. Is it going to be all centralized? Is it going to be all digitized and made available online? Is it only going to be available for consultation only on site? That makes it very different in terms of how possible it is, and countries have approached this very differently. Some countries have had them collecting and digitizing and then returning all the material to the private owners. This has happened in Northern Ireland, and it has worked very well. It means that there isn't a problem of storage, but there is availability. As to the issue, which I think was also in that question about, why, I think amateur film doesn't so much now have a bad press, but it has had a bad press about being parochial, about being very narrow in its interest, poor quality, boring, and all of these things, I think, have created a legacy of thinking quite negatively about it. I think that has been transformed to some extent by fantastic work by archives, by projects like the Home Movie Day, and the recognition that has been given to amateur media as a really important source of cultural memory and collective memory. And maybe there's something about as with increasing homogenization of societies, the need for the individuality and identities of local places and regional identities and traditions that are there in many of the amateur records of the 20th century, because that's what many of them went out to film. That has become increasingly important to rework, revisit, and find comfort and strength in for the future.
Thank you. Graham, maybe you have something to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Heather and I are lucky in that there's 14 regional archives within the UK, and I think we've got a lot of the digital collections are fantastic, But I would urge, if you do ever get the opportunity, do try and watch amateur film in its original materiality if you can. Because I had this experience of watching a 28mm film a few years ago that was projected, and I think there's something quite magical about this kind of process. So I think, you know, that it's fantastic to have the digital access, but if you can reproduce the conditions of its original exhibition, I think, you know, that in itself is also something of merit.
Wow. Alexander, and I guess it's also the question exactly for you about the, you know, this distribution and popularization. Let me just a little bit change this question. Do you believe that a wide distribution of an amateur cinema is suited to this kind of cinema?
Well, it was not designed to be distributed or copied even by the technology. But of course, you can copy it even like in the past, but it was not designed for this purpose. So that's why, and also this personal interest. So that's why it was not so popular in the past. But today we see that a lot of artists, film directors, not only the researchers, are trying to use such footage in their works. So, and also we are trying such approaches to popularize these films by inviting artists and also filmmakers to work with our collections and to work with our materials, and it works fine. For instance, at this program we have this film Derevo, but also the remake of this film Derevo, which was done by like the new interpretation of this film, which was done by the director from Kyiv, Oleg Chorny, won the nomination for best usage of footage in the short film last year at London at the focal competition for the films which are made out of archival footages. So, and also this film traveled through a lot of festivals and so on. So, and we are trying such cooperations also to have this new fresh view on these films, and also working with the musicians who are writing the soundtracks for the silent films and so on. And it's a lot, audience finds it very interesting. It's all the time something very new and new visually, but unfortunately in this like digital format, but because as Graham mentioned, that this live real screening of the film is really something magical and very special.
Yeah, and we do believe that too, and really we're very, very looking for returning into the, you know, into cinemas and this traditional screenings in cinemas, and hope to back with this format very soon. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. It was really a big pleasure for me to talk to you, and thank you again for your incredible work on the program Film Troubadours, Scotland and Ukraine. I just briefly remind our audience that they can watch all these films for free from all around the world on our platform Docuspace.org, and every day we are releasing a new film which which remains for 48 hours. So please watch them, do not miss it. And thank you again, and see you later. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.